guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. This is a nonfiction book about women who worked in factories in the early 20th century painting dials with radium paint. They used essentially no protective gear and even put the radium paint in their mouths because that was what they were instructed to do at their jobs. And as a result, many of them got radium poisoning and died. This is a story of those women, their lives, their deaths, and they're suing the company who caused their poisoning. I liked this book more than I expected to, and I expected it to be good. I gave this book 5 stars, and this is absolutely going to make my favorites at the end of the year. This was wonderful. This is a 450-page nonfiction book about a rather dense subject, and I read this entire thing in 2 sittings. It took me less than 30 hours to read this book, and it was wonderful. I didn't want to put it down. I probably wouldn't have, except I was so sleep deprived that I literally needed to sleep. It was absolutely wonderful, and I cannot recommend this enough. I do want to give one brief warning at the beginning of this video that this book is very rough to read. The women experience radium poisoning, which deteriorates your bones as well as many other problems. It causes cancer, it causes sarcomas, it causes a lot of bad things, basically. A variety of bad things. But it's kind of described rather graphically, and there would be descriptions of women who just like pulled chunks of their jawbone out because it was breaking off, and it was rather horrifying to read. So if you're squeamish about stuff like that, this might not be the book for you. And it was also hard to read because the company was almost cartoonishly evil. Like, it was just to the point of ridiculous. Like, how does this exist? Like, how can they justify saying these things and just blatantly lying? And when I say blatantly lying, I'm not exaggerating. Like, they would straight up say, after radium poisoning had been proven in a court of law for another case, to women who were working at a different factory who hadn't heard of that, they would say, oh, it's safe. Oh, you don't have to worry. It's good for you. It's healthy for you. And then those women died, and they just said it wasn't their fault. They would say that they'd never said it was safe, even though clearly they'd run newspaper ads saying it was safe. Like, it was cartoonish how evil they were, and rather disturbing that it was real. I think the best way to describe this book is that it is the closest a nonfiction book can get to a horror novel. This book was so horrifying in so many different ways, just from, yes, the physical illness, but also just the company's behavior and the people who were involved. And everything these women went through was so awful to read about, but their stories were riveting. I couldn't put this down. The only minor negative thing I have to say about this book is that sometimes the writing seemed a little bit melodramatic, like exclamation marks were used on a regular basis, and they would end chapters saying things like they had proven that radium was dangerous, but no one told the girls ... It's like, did you really need that ellipsis there? Like, did that really add anything to this? It didn't really detract from this book at all. Like, it was a wonderful story that was just kind of a superficial thing that I didn't like. It was just unnecessary. Like, with a story this intense, you really don't need to have your writing work that hard. Like, the story does all the work. Just the writing should be as innocuous as possible. And I am nitpicky about writing. I don't think many people would really notice that except me. But it was something that was just like a little bit of a negative, but it didn't bother me too much. It was mostly just I would roll my eyes on occasion. But the story itself was amazing. It was wonderful. Like, it was everything to me. What these women went through was so horrible, and it almost seems like a service to them to read about it and how hard they worked to get their story in the press, to get people to hear what had happened to them, because this was such a seemingly preventable thing. Like, people knew radium was bad. The scientists who created radium knew it was bad. The Curies knew radium was bad. They were quoted as saying that in like 1901. So it doesn't make sense that 20 years later these girls were told that it was safe, it was healthy to put radium in their mouths, to paint their bodies with the radium paint. It seems like someone should have prevented that, but just no one cared enough to prevent it. I think one of the people in this book said that the girls were meaningless. I can't think of the exact word that was used, but one person in this book said the girls were meaningless to the company. They could just be discarded at a moment's notice and someone else could be brought in if they were too sick. The company literally fired people for being too sick to work there after they'd gotten sick from working there. It was the most disturbing thing I've read in a very long time. Many of them were just teenagers when they started working at the company because this was one of those jobs that a lot of women got before they got married. That they worked once they were old enough to work but not quite ready to get married when they were late teens, maybe early 20s. And that's why it's called the Radium Girls and not the Radium Women. Although I do wish that once they gotten into their 20s and 30s that Kate Moore had stopped referring to them as girls, but again, that's not like a major thing. That was just something that I kind of would have preferred. But they were just teenagers when they were working there, and a lot of them died in their 20s. They were dead by 30. A lot of them didn't live to see 22, even. And it was just very sad to read because they were children, honestly. They started working there at age 14, 15. They were just kids who were told something was safe and died in 10 years because of it. They never got to be adults. Some of them never got to have children. Some of them not didn't get to see their children grow up. Some of them lost limbs because of it, and it was a heartbreaking to read. I also really enjoyed the scope of the story because I feel like a lot of nonfiction has a very limited scope. It's focusing on a very specific thing, and everything outside of that specific thing or event or moment is just kind of summarized. But in this book, it didn't feel like anything was summarized. It felt like everything was part of the main focus, but in such a natural way. It flowed so smoothly. Like, this book genuinely read like a fiction novel. And I don't come across a lot of nonfiction that really reads exactly like fiction almost. This just felt so, so natural. There were so many women involved in multiple cities, and Moore did a great job of keeping all of them relevant and reminding you of details about them so they didn't get too convoluted and too mixed up. Because I did have a little bit of trouble following just who was who because there was so many, but honestly not as much as I really expected to, considering how many women were in this book. In the first couple of chapters I was concerned, like, oh no, they're introducing like 20 different people, and then by the end of the book I knew them all. I knew who they were, I knew their stories, I knew what happened in their lives, and I think she did a great job of that because that's not an easy thing to do when you have so many different people and so many different moving pieces. There was a point where I kind of expected the story to stop and just like start summarizing life after, but it never got there. It felt like it just kept going, and it kept going smoothly until the women's deaths, until all the women were dead, some of them in their 60s. Not all of them died young. Some of them lived long lives with high rates of cancer. Some of the towns themselves had high rates of cancer, even for the people who didn't work there. It was one of those things that you question how it could happen. How did nobody stop this before it got to the point where so many people were dying, where children were dying, because some of the women's children died young because of the radium passed down to them from their mothers. And I don't know. I feel like I just keep talking about how horrifying and sad this book was, but it was one of those books where I wasn't even thinking about anything critical while I was reading it. I was just engrossed in the story of these people. It really touched me emotionally and physically, kind of, because reading this made my body hurt. Like, if you ever read something that's just like so descriptive of other people's pain, that you start getting pain in the same areas. Like, the first day I read this book, where I read like the first 270 pages in one sitting, when I got up from the sofa, I was in so much pain, my whole body, just from reading about other people's aches and pains, because it was so descriptive and so real to me. But this was wonderful. I genuinely cannot recommend this enough. It was just a fantastic book all around. A very important story and a very well told story. Just a highly, highly recommend. Let me know down below if you've read The Radium Girls and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.